Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Robbie V, and I'll be your narrator for tonight. Tonight's chilling tale is entitled How to Perform an Exorcism at 20,000 Feet by Reddit user Colorblindness. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. As a traveling missionary, I've seen a lot of things that have connected me to God. The world is a beautiful place, filled with all kinds of people working their hardest to serve His glory. But there have been times my faith has wavered. This incident happened around 4 years ago, while I was traveling to Jerusalem for the chance to visit the Holy City. Even before I boarded the flight to Israel, I had been dealing with issues that tested me. My mother had been battling cancer for some time, and I had taken a short break from my God-given assignment to visit her in my home country of Greece. That was probably a mistake, because I saw how the disease was wrecking her body. I had to come to terms with the fact that she wouldn't be on this earth for much longer. She would tell me, "You mustn't cry, my son. You can't weep for someone who is on the way to visit the Lord." I kept a straight face for her, but inwardly I was tormented. I was questioning my faith because the prayers I offered for her well-being were going unanswered. It made little sense to me because I had seen how God healed others during my missionary work. Why then was my mother being excluded from His mercy? Wasn't she more righteous than the sinners that received His miracles? Just as I gathered my things from the taxi to go inside the airport, my brother gave me the call that Mom had passed. Even though I thought I was ready for the news, it felt like I'd been crushed by a boulder. Suddenly the world stopped, and I cursed God. I told my brother that I had to go, and walked into the airport. I needed to leave and clear my head, and the tour of the Holy Land felt like a chance to reconnect to my spiritual heritage, perhaps even rekindle my love for God again. Instead, it was a visit from the devil that changed my life on that flight. Perhaps it was because I was still in mourning, but as the flight attendant began to go over safety regulations, I paid no attention to the pale-faced man that brushed past me. I did notice his expression, though. Something in his eyes reminded me of my own inner turmoil. He was carrying a burden, and I had no idea how important that would be until hours later. He carried an overhead bag that also bumped against me as he reached his seat. Something jabbed at my side from within the bag, and he mumbled an apology. Whatever it was, it felt sharp and cold. The flight attendant finished up her instructions for us and returned to the front. I settled down and checked my phone one last time. I reviewed pictures of my sweet mother and tried my best to keep it together. When I switched my phone off for the flight, it felt as if though I was saying goodbye. The woman next to me squeezed my hand. "Father, are you all right?" she whispered. I slipped my phone into my pocket and gave her a curt nod before forcing a smile. Our plane shook gently as we pushed down the runway, and I got a better look at the pale-faced man. As a man of God, I knew it would be wrong to judge, but something felt off about him. He was nervous and fidgety, constantly looking at his overhead bag. But I was too tired to give it any further thought, and instead slipped on the free headphones offered by the flight and turned on some soothing music. My flight would last another 8 hours, and I didn't want to bother wasting time wondering about the plight of someone else when I was already experiencing my own crisis. I was about to close my eyes when I felt someone push past me again. I looked back and saw it was the same man, this time rushing to the bathroom as if though he needed to vomit. "Poor guy, must not handle flights very well," the woman beside me commented. The entire plane shook and I grabbed my seat, feeling queasy as well. "That might be me in a few minutes," I admitted. "Well, if you need anything, I'm a registered nurse," she offered me, her kind blue eyes staring into my own. For some reason, she reminded me of my mother again, but I knew it just had to be because of my recent loss. "I'm sure I'll be fine," I told her, just as I heard the most horrific retching sound from the tiny bathroom. She frowned as we both listened to the man spilling his guts out, and then decided to get up and offer aid. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, tapping on the door softly. "Go away," he screamed back. "I'm gonna get one of the flight attendants. Can you keep an eye on him?" she asked. I really didn't want to get involved, but before I could decline, she was already headed to the front of the plane. So I casually stood up and leaned against the opposite restroom, watching and waiting for the man to come out. He kept vomiting for at least another 5 minutes, each sound he made was worse than the last. It honestly gave me the impression he was dying. Then there was a noise I don't think I will ever forget. It was a deep, guttural growl, the kind you might hear from a fearsome predator, followed by the sounds of bone breaking. "Sir, are you all right?" I asked as I knocked on the door. "Leave me," he shouted back. I looked down and saw little slivers of blood sliding out from under the door and decided to try to unlock it. For all we knew, he could be attempting suicide. I looked up to see the attendant arrive with a safety key, and she announced that she would be opening the door. I'll never forget what I saw inside. The man was hunched over the toilet, clearly in distress and barely breathing. His mouth and cheeks were covered in blood and some sort of brown mucus. There was a thick string of black slimy goo connecting his tongue to the toilet. Inside the pool of water, I saw what looked like a baby-sized turd filled with shards of glass. It smelled like something had died. The broken slivers of glass had come from the mirror, and it was clear from his scarred arms and face that my guess about self-harm had been right. Immediately, the attendant took a step back and then asked the nurse, "Do you have any medical equipment?" She nodded, pointing toward her overhead bag, as we both kept our eyes locked on the man. I had never seen anything this severe before, and it shook me into a petrifying fear. The whole plane suddenly felt very claustrophobic, as I realized whatever virus he had could be contagious. Then, just as the nurse reached for her bag, the man moved like a lightning bolt. I saw his eyes turn to a dark blood red, and he screamed like a banshee. He grabbed one of the broken pieces of glass that had been lodged in his face and punctured the nurse's neck. The entire third class suddenly erupted into chaos. Then he reached for his own bag and pulled something out. It must have been the same object that had jabbed me in my side earlier. It looked like some sort of dark statue, the kind you might see in a museum for Assyrian cultures. And suddenly, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread fall over me. This was not just a man dealing with a disease of the body. His soul was infected with evil. I realized as he immediately smashed the idol onto the floor of the third-class cabin. As the dark statue broke apart, an ethereal mist emerged with a rasping noise, and I found myself immediately feeling dizzy. I was not prepared for this, but my only instinct was to protect all of the passengers. "Everyone move to business class, now!" I shouted as I reached for the nurse and helped her to her feet. The man was not moving at all. Instead, he was crawling around on his hands and feet like a wild animal, licking up the broken pieces of the idol as everyone began to flee to the next cabin. "We need something to block the door," I shouted as the last passenger ran past me, and I slid the partition door between the cabins closed. I knew that it would not hold the stranger for long, though. One of the attendants bought a food cart, and we shoved it against the door to block the man in third class, but I still didn't feel safe. Beside me in business class, almost all of the passengers were standing up trying to get a look at the scene beyond the partition. The injured nurse started to gasp for breath, and I focused my attention on her. "My bag," she whispered, as she tried to hold her hand firmly on her windpipe. "Lay her down," I told a few people standing close by. Just as they were going to, we heard a loud clang against the door, and I saw the stranger was clawing at the glass. His facial expressions were constantly changing, from desperation to anger to confusion, and then back to rage. "Please, you don't understand. I'm not in control," he screamed. I knew precisely what we were dealing with. The only problem was I had no clue how to handle this evil. One of the passengers was apparently reading my mind and asked, "Pastor, ain't you gonna do something?" I hated to admit my weakness, but I knew I couldn't lie to these innocent people. "I have only seen others perform the rituals. I have no idea how to stop it," I said, looking down at my hands. I was visibly shaking. It made me feel so helpless. The emotion from my mother's passing pushed me over the edge as I sat down and gripped the chair, not even daring to look a passenger in the eye. A few of them stood idly for a moment, perhaps thinking I might overcome my grief quickly. Then the man on the other side of the glass started spitting violently against it, shouting the most obscene things he could as he tried to get through. One man, dressed in what looked to be casual business wear, reached up to his bag and unzipped it and quickly pulled out a firearm. More people began to panic, but he shouted frantically, "I'm an air marshal, everyone please stand back!" He aimed his weapon at the man on the other side of the glass, as more people shouted and shoved themselves out of the way. I stood up blocking his path and held the food cart in place. "That is just gonna make the demon angrier," I argued. "And what do you expect us to do then? Sit here peacefully while he tears his plane apart?" he said, shoving me aside. "I am not going to die today, Father." He fired a single shot that broke through the glass, and the man went flying backward into the aisle. Some of the crowd cheered, but I knew this wouldn't be a happy ending. Instead, they heard the man choking on his own blood as a strange mist filled his throat and entered his lungs, consuming him and making him convulse. His bones were cracking and snapping as he bent into impossible shapes. Then he lay still, and the passengers cheered again. It was a short-lived celebration. Outside, we heard the rumbling of thunder, and I pushed past the crowd to get a better look. There were dark clouds outside, lightning and thunder dancing across the sky. We had unleashed something unholy. Suddenly, the corpse began to shake again, this time even more violently than before. The unseen force was pulling him up the way a puppet master might its marionette doll, twitching it and tugging at it to stand. The lifeless ghoul was now standing in the aisle, its dead eyes staring into our souls, hungering for flesh. It shrieked. At the same time, lightning struck the plane and the lights flickered. The ghoul burst through the door, the food cart flung toward the crowd as though they were ants being pushed aside by the kick of a boot. The dangerous demon gave me a wicked grin, tilting the neck of the stranger toward me and pointing his long, pale finger at me and cooing,
"You shall all be taken to hell."
The air marshal tried to fire a few more shots toward the ghast, but it was a fruitless effort. The bullets went through him as though his body were now shredded cheese. His only goal seemed to be getting to the woman that tried to help him. It occurred to me that while he was distracted, I might have a way to reach my own bag. I had little to stop the undead creature except perhaps some holy water and maybe a sacrament or a cross, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. I took my chances and made a dash toward my bag. I managed to climb over the upside-down food cart and get to the partition door just as the demonic man crawled over top of the nurse's injured body and began to lick her face.
"Your skin shall serve a higher purpose now,"
the demon bellowed as the lights continued to flicker. The plane was beginning to shake even more as I realized the turbulence could knock us out of the sky. Did this beast of hell truly hope to kill us all? Just as I was grabbing my bag, I fell backward, being jostled around the cabin as the plane started to descend at an alarming rate. An overhead announcement came on as I heard alarms blare as well.
"Attention passengers, we're making an emergency landing as soon as possible. Please buckle up."
The demon was breathing black wind into the woman. Her own eyes started rolling in the back of her head as the two bodies began to mesh together. It was horrifying to behold, but I didn't waver from my plan and opened my bag, taking out the crucifix I had brought with me. I held it close as I turned to see the now mangled bodies were crawling toward the roof of the plane.
"Lest thou veres haral, human, you will die in this place and meet your own mother in hell,"
the demon shrieked as it saw the holy item I carried. Both of its mouths were twisting together like grinding gears as I said the most heartfelt prayer I could think of.
"My mother was blessed to walk with the saints, and she will cast you out with only a mustard seed of faith."
He lunged toward me, the cross burning his misshapen limbs, but his power was overwhelming what little strength I had. The holy relic skid under the next row of seats as I felt the plane rattle louder and louder. I was close to losing oxygen from the rush as passengers scrambled to try to find safety from the demon. It was pulling out its own spine from between its fused bodies, jamming it into my side as it taunted.
"You are a weak, pathetic man who hides beneath the shroud of false idols. The glory of hell will swallow you whole,"
it said between both its mouths.
I thought about my mother and the likelihood of seeing her in heaven again, but I could also hear her voice urging me not to give up. There was still so much I needed to do here on Earth, and that's what compelled me to close my eyes and offer another sincere prayer. This one wasn't for me, but for the souls of those on this flight. Let the Lord guide them then, I said. Then I lunged for the emergency exit door and shoved the handle open. At this height, it should never have budged. I knew very well they were sealed, and only after landing would they release, but I was compelled to give it a try. The pressure in the cabin instantly pushed the demon beyond the plane, and he was absorbed into the black clouds around us. Then with this newfound strength, I managed to pull the door close. As it locked in place, I drew a breath and watched the clouds begin to clear. The passengers erupted with cheering, this time for me and my bravery. I went and retrieved my cross and put it around my neck. Glory goes to the Lord for offering me his power for this trial, I admitted as I sat down, my hands covered with blisters. I knew God had helped me face this evil, and as I closed my eyes and relaxed for the remainder of the flight, I saw my mother smiling at me from beyond the grave. My test of faith was over. The evil had not won. When we arrived at Jerusalem, I asked the flight crew and passengers to keep this as quiet as possible. No praise should be given except to God for carrying us through, I told them. But since then, I've heard a few stories spread, and oftentimes there is one other element that I apparently wasn't even aware of, even though I should have known it. The marshal claimed another man was standing by the door, clad in white, with a double-edged sword at his belt. And it is that image that keeps me close to the Lord even now. And I know evil is still out there, and that I must remain vigilant.